Yes, we are live.
All right. Hello, and welcome to NPN's first ever webinar. We are so excited to have you here. My name is Beth Cohen-Dorfman, and I'm the Programming Director for NPN. The topic of sex after baby is so important to our relationships, and we're thrilled to have licensed marital and family therapist Kim Semino here to walk us through the ins and outs of what can be a difficult time. Sit back, get comfy, and we'll get some great tips together. If you have questions and comments as Kim is presenting, just type them into the chat box on the right. I'll keep a record of all of them, and Kim will answer them at the end of her presentation. Remember, you can continue to ask questions during the Q&A time, but she will not address any questions until the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, here's Kim Semino.
Thanks so much, Beth, and thank you to NPN for hosting me tonight. I know that 8:30 is kind of a magical hour in most houses where it finally gets quiet, so I give you all a lot of credit for being here. I'm so excited to talk about this topic, but first I just have to share a funny anecdote about this presentation. I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was asking me, what I was working on, and, I mentioned to her that I was doing a webinar on postpartum sex and relationships and what happens, and she got kind of quiet and was like a little weird about it, which kind of surprised me, but kind of didn't. But then she finally asked me, well, Kim, how do you even know about that? And, my response was, well, gee, thanks, Mom. Like, that's one of my clinical areas of interest, and I have 2 kids, give me a little credit. And she was like, oh, well, I didn't know that. And it turns out about 24 hours later, I get a text from my sister who said, Mom thinks you're giving a presentation on postmortem sex. Please don't ever tell her the truth. Ha, ha, ha. And so if any of you are here based on the recommendations of my mom, you probably want to drop off now because I think you are going to be extremely disappointed about what comes next. But for the rest of us, I thought I would just start by giving a little bit of my story. I'm a mom to 2 boys, ages 3 and 6. And getting this presentation together, I really did a lot of thinking back to, my early days in parenting. And I have a really clear memory of sitting down with my husband and a group of our friends at dinner and telling them that we were expecting. And we we're so excited to tell them. And of course, they were all really appropriately supportive and, said all the right things, like, what a blessing, what a joy. And it was about 10 minutes and probably 1 cocktail later that we started to hear, a little bit more of the truth. And it was sort of disguised as a joke. And, so what we were hearing were comments like, oh, well, you better sleep now because you're never going to sleep again, and say goodbye to your sex life and, get used to seeing her in yoga pants because that's all she's going to wear every day. And I remember leaving that dinner, and my husband and I, we got in the car and we looked at each other in that really naive, blissful way that you have, before the baby actually comes. And, we said, thank goodness that will never be us. I mean, I feel so sorry for them. I can't imagine what's going on in their marriage. I really hope that they get help. And so 6 months later, lo and behold, our little bundle of joy arrives, and he was amazing. I mean, we just fell in love instantly, and it was really hard. He had colic, and he cried for probably 5 months straight. He was either crying or nursing. Most days, I did not get out of bed. I didn't take a shower. I didn't do any housework. I didn't respond to emails. I didn't see friends. My husband and I were like walking zombies. So, I mean, as you can imagine, there was very little, and actually, if I'm going to be honest, there was no sex going on during that time period. And I remember so clearly going to my 6-week checkup, and I dreaded this checkup because I knew from my girlfriends that this was the checkup where the doctor was going to say that I was good to go, that we were okay to start having sex again. And I couldn't even imagine that. I mean, I could barely shower, let alone think about having sex. Like, who could do that? But I took a little bit of comfort in the fact that I had a really good doctor, and I was so certain that he was going to explain this all to me, that he was going to tell me, what it was that I was feeling, what should I do, what other people do. And the extent of the conversation was pretty much, okay, so you're good to go. I mean, like physically it's safe for you to have sex again. What do you want to use for birth control? And, we briefly talked about it for about 60 seconds, and he sent me on my way. And I just remember walking out of that appointment feeling so lost and so overwhelmed. And when I look back, I really think about why I didn't say anything, like why I didn't tell him how I was feeling. And the reality is that I think that I was really ashamed. I thought, okay, well, it must just be me. All the other moms out there must have this figured out. Otherwise he would have talked to me about it, right? I wonder what's wrong with me. And the reality is that if we lived in another country like France, who is a little bit more advanced in their thinking about maternal medicine, that conversation would have looked completely different. That conversation would have looked like, okay, so medically it's probably safe for you to have sex. How do you feel about that? Do you feel ready? Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns? Here are some good tips for you. Why don't you come back in 2 to 3 months and let's talk about how it's going? And at that appointment, it would be, are you having orgasms? Is your partner satisfied? Do you need to see a physical therapist for help with your Kegels? How about a pelvic floor lift? And, I really think about how different my experience would have been in those early years if someone had had that conversation with me. So my goal for today is to really just let this be the start of a dialogue that you can take to your partner, your doctor, a therapist, your girlfriends, whoever it is that you can talk to, because this is an important issue. And I think it's really great that you're all here to start talking. So I found this really, really great quote. When I was doing some of the research, it's interesting how few realistic quotes are actually out there about what it is like to have a baby and the impact on the marriage. But the author, Nora Ephron, said, when you have a baby, you set off an explosion in your marriage, and when the dust settles, your marriage is different from what it was. Not better necessarily, not worse necessarily, but different. And I just don't think I could have said this any better. Probably the number one question that I get asked when couples come to see me after having a baby is, when is it going to get back to normal? And I really just have to encourage them to throw their old idea of normal out the window. If they spend all of their time trying to get back to what was normal, they can really miss out on a great opportunity to create a new normal that works for them, as parents, as partners, in this new phase of their life. So that being said, let's talk just, briefly about, what it is that actually happens to you physically that contributes to some of these changes. Sort of the really obvious one are the hormonal fluctuations. You're up, you're down, you don't know if you're, coming or going, you're in the mood, you're not in the mood, you're nice, you're mean, you're all over the place, and that makes it pretty challenging for both you and your partner to figure out, where you stand around sex. Particularly if you're breastfeeding, your estrogen levels tend to be really, really low because your prolactin levels are high. And most women will not see an increase in their libido until the estrogen levels until they wean actually, and their estrogen levels go up and the prolactin levels start to come down. And that can typically take quite a while, even after you wean. I mean, this is a very gradual process. If you don't notice an increase in your libido after you stop nursing, you should definitely talk to your doctor. And there are some tests that they can run and, sort of look into that a little bit. I mean, on the topic of breastfeeding, I think it's, important to point out that women also have a hard time with trying to figure out how they feel about, their shift in thinking about their breasts. Their breasts are so heavily connected to providing nutrition for their baby that sometimes it feels really unnatural to think about their breasts as an erogenous area. Not to mention that often their breasts are sore. They're afraid of leaking milk on their partner. And, they've basically had someone sucking on their breast for hours a day for months, if not years. And that can definitely take a toll. Fatigue is an obvious factor. And fatigue impacts everything. I mean, obviously, it impacts more than just the simple notion of, like, I'm too tired to have sex. I mean, it impacts your hormones, your ability to create endorphins, attention, all of the things that sort of work as a package to contribute to a healthy sex life. If there's one lesson I think that I wish I would have taken a little bit, or I should say pay a little bit more attention to, was this idea of, really trying to treat fatigue. I know that the advice is always sleep when the baby's sleeping, take naps, and that's really hard to do when your house is a mess, you haven't showered, you haven't checked emails, but for me, I now can recognize that, if I had decided to nap, it definitely would have been better for my health, it would have been better for the baby, and it definitely would have been better for our marriage. I would have been better rested, I would have been probably a whole heck of a lot nicer, and I definitely think it would have left me more emotionally and physically available for my partner. Pain is a very realistic factor. Sex can be painful for a long time, even after that 6-week checkup. Just because you're medically cleared doesn't necessarily mean that sex is a good idea. That's something you really need to make sure that you're communicating with your partner about, and making sure that, you're checking in. A lot of couples feel pressure to get back to some sort of sex routine, and sometimes it can just be too early. So you want to make sure that, you're talking about what's comfortable, what's not comfortable, and, and just on a really practical note, you want to make sure that, you have whatever you need to make it more comfortable, whether that's lubrication or, whatever it is that will work better for you. But, make sure you have all those tools on hand. So the emotional factors I'm going to get into, in much greater detail as this presentation goes on. But there is one that I do want to touch on briefly now, and it's the idea of lovers versus parents. One of the things I hear from new parents is that, they're really afraid to talk about their feelings of grief and sadness about the loss of the couple. As they move from being a couple to being a family, most parents are completely in love with their baby, and also sometimes really feel the loss of the primary focus being the relationship. They feel sad that their day spending, Sunday morning lounging in bed and reading the paper are a thing of the past, at least for the foreseeable future. A lot of times parents feel really guilty for having these feelings because they think it means they're being disloyal to the baby, or sometimes they're even accused of being jealous about the attention the baby's getting. But these feelings are really normal and important to vocalize in order to make sure that your needs as a couple are being prioritized. So in understanding what your new normal might look like, it's sometimes helpful to know that you are not alone. So in a study by John Gottman, and if you don't know who John Gottman is, he is probably the guru in marital research. I mean, he just has some really, really wonderful books out there. He wrote The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. He wrote Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child. And he wrote And Baby Makes 3, which is one of the publications I'm going to refer to quite a bit throughout this presentation. And so if you're interested in any of these topics, I would really recommend that you pick these books up. They're really great and easy to read and easy to use. I use them a lot in my practice. So in his research, which really, his findings parallel all of the research that I reviewed, what they found is that women's sexual desire goes way down after the birth of a baby, and men's tend to stay about the same. They'll see a dip in the men's desire right after the birth of the baby, but it tends to stabilize much more quickly than you see in women. If you look at, just the first 2 bullet points alone, women reported feeling sexual desire once a week, and men reported feeling sexual desire once a day. Right there, that's a huge fundamental difference. And looking at these differences, you can see that where couples used to be fairly aligned in their sexual desires pre-baby, there is a major gap post-baby. And this sudden shift is typically really stressful and confusing for couples. And couples have a hard time communicating their needs and wants and feelings about this shift. So that being said, couples always ask, what do we do? We don't know what to do. And that's what we're going to get into next, and that's, more of the fun section. So in the book, And Baby Makes 3, Gottman and Gottman divulged the secrets of master couples who are happy with their sex life after having children. And they did this by interviewing couples and identifying what they call master couples. And these are couples who just, they really seem to get it. They maintain high levels of satisfaction with their marriage for years and years, and that includes their sex life. So they came up with, what they sort of call the golden rule, and then like 10 secrets and tips that support the golden rule. So the golden rule is that every positive thing you do towards your partner is foreplay. Let go of the old ideas of foreplay and try to widen your definition of foreplay. Especially after becoming a parent, foreplay tends to start like way, way, way before the actual act. Really try to be cognizant of how many positive actions you make towards your partner each day. After having kids, research shows that positive actions specifically directed towards one partner really tends to drop off. It is very easy in the chaos of our days to let go of and lose sight of ways to be kind and thoughtful towards our partners. You still see pretty high rates of family-focused positive activity, but that is really different than couple-focused. The couples who report healthy sex lives have a much higher rate of positive interactions than those who don't. My older son, had a kindergarten teacher who had one rule in her classroom, and that rule was just be nice. And she really, truly, in her heart, believed that if she just encouraged kids to follow this rule, her classroom would run really smoothly. And you know what? She was absolutely right. It was the most lovely environment. And it was funny because I thought about that rule and I thought, oh, well, that applies to marriage and sex. So if you want to improve your sex life, just really try to focus and tell yourself, just be nice, be kind and thoughtful as often as you can. This is just a little funny cartoon that I thought sort of illustrated that point. It's pretty accurate, if you ask me. So beyond the golden rule of just be nice, there are 10 secrets that couples with healthy sex lives practice. And we're going to go through them one by one. So secret number 1 is accept that things have changed since the baby arrived. It seems like this one should be obvious, and it's really not. This is actually one of the more challenging steps. Really talk about the changes that are happening, all around you. Like, rejoice in your baby, celebrate your baby, and talk about when it's hard, because it is really hard a lot of the time. Talk about the changes and being able to care for yourself, your home, your spouse. We go from relatively competent people who can usually manage to, shower, work, talk, to sometimes not being able to do any of those things. So accept that your standards and priorities will shift after you have kids. I think about, sort of the napping example that I gave earlier. Like, if I had accepted that my priorities needed to shift and that sleep needed to be a priority for me to be the type of mom and partner that I wanted to be, I really do think that my house would have been a much less stressful place. But I had a really hard time accepting that I had to let some of that go. And I do think that, at that point, my family, and my marriage paid the price for that. And, I really hope that other people can, accept that you can't do it all. Some of these things are just going to have to wait. The next one, I think, is probably one of the more important points I'm going to make tonight, because I spend a lot of time in therapy sessions with couples who really get stuck in keeping score. So after the birth of a baby, couples tend to spend a lot, and I mean really a lot of time keeping track of who did what, when, who has it worse, who's more sleep deprived, who's doing more chores, like who is doing more FaceTime with the baby, who's this, who's that, and it's pretty exhausting for couples. I think that we do this in order to help soothe our own feelings of inadequacy by feeling superior over our partners, while also being able to blame someone else for our shortcomings. Keeping score tends to build a lot of resentment, a lot of contempt, and really goes against the idea of true partnership. When I was pulling this presentation together, I remembered this, like, it was one of those really horrible parenting nights that I know that we all have. It's one of those nights where you, like, for a millisecond, think about leaving your kids at the fire station. It's, like, my younger son had the stomach flu, and he was, like, throwing up everywhere, and this had been going on for, like, 24 hours. We were exhausted. My older son was acting out because the little guy was getting all the attention, and he ended up, like, running through, like, a pile of vomit and leaving little vomit footprints, like, all over the house. And of course he, like, slipped and cracked his head, and it was a mess. It was a total mess. And of course, my husband and I, instead of, like, really bonding together, we just started to get snippier and snippier with each other, and pointing out, like, all the things that we were doing that they weren't doing, and aggressive in our comments. Well, maybe I would have done that if I'd gotten any sleep last night, but, like, someone didn't get up, the second time he threw up. And, these comments went on for a while. And then I will never forget, my husband all of a sudden just looked at me with this, like, really dazed expression on his face and just stared at me and said, "I just realized, for tonight anyway, it's us against them. If we don't bond together, we're never going to make it through this night. It will destroy us." And it was, obviously that was, like, hysterical, and that helped in itself to sort of change the mood and, sort of remind us that we're partners. But it was true. Like, we had so become ingrained in this idea that, like, somehow, like, I had it worse than he did, and he had it worse than me, that we lost the idea that, like, it kind of sucked for both of us. It was awful. Like, no one was out partying or anything. Like, we were both cleaning up vomit and honestly doing the best we could. So as soon as we were able to kind of let that go and remember that, like, we need to be in this together, the stress level in the house went way down. And I do tend to see that it sort of pops up again when, like, stress levels are high and we've lost sort of this idea that, like, we need to be a team, or, we've become emotionally disconnected. And so now we kind of use that language when we realize, like, we're not working as a team. We're like, well, it's us against them, whoever that might be. Like, it's us against the school board, or it's us against I don't know who. But, it's just that sort of a reminder to us that we need to, put some us back into the situation. The last bullet point on here is, I think really important and really a touchy subject for a lot of both moms and dads. Really try to support the new mom in talking about her feelings about her body. But please, please, please let her do the talking. Be really, really careful, dads or partners, about just not saying anything. Just let her talk. Be supportive. Remind her how much you love her. I had a dad who just innocently said, when his wife was going on about, like, how upset she was about, not losing the baby weight, he said, "Well, why don't you start going to the gym?" Thinking that he was being really supportive. And of course, like, what he did was step in a landmine, and it turned into, "Oh my gosh, you just called me fat. How could you do that? I knew you thought I was fat." And it was a big mess. And so in hindsight, like, what he learned was, I wish that I had just said, "I love you. Let me know what you need." So, that is my suggestion to everyone who is in a supportive listening role. Really try just to listen. So secret number 2, wait, let me get the slide up there. Okay, is to ask each other for sex. Very few couples, especially here in the US, actually ask each other for sex. Instead, a lot of couples resort to, kind of confusing, subtle messages to test the waters to see if their partner's interested. And these are about as confusing for couples as the schoolyard tactics our mother, told us about when we were little, like if he's mean to you, it means he likes you, which I don't know about you, but I always found that to be really baffling. Like, what is that about? Recently I had a couple come into my office, I think this was a couple months ago, and the wife talked about how hurt she was by her husband rejecting her when she had approached him for sex a couple days before. And And the poor husband, he was so confused. And he said, when did you approach me for sex? I can't imagine I would turn you down. So I asked her to explain her approach, and it turned out that it consisted of her saying, hey, it's going to be a cold night tonight. Should we turn the heat on? Wink, wink. And she thought she was being really cute and sexy, but her husband was doing like 3 things at once and just wasn't sort of tuned into this. So his response was, poor guy, no way in hell. Like, remember our gas bill from last year? And sort of went into this like talk about money. And she just went off to lick her wounds without ever telling him that she had wanted to have sex and that she was so hurt. And this sort of festered between them for quite a while, leading to more hurt and more rejection. So for couples like these who really struggle with asking each other for sex, I highly recommend that they check in with each other using a number system, with 1 being, sort of no chance in hell, and 10 being, let's go right now. So by checking in with each other on a daily basis, it brings a consciousness back into the relationship about the decision to have sex that often gets lost. It forces couples to address the issue on a daily basis. That way weeks can't slip past before you notice that it's been a while, since you've even thought about having sex. So let's say, a couple tries this, and one partner says they're a 2, and the other partner says they're a 6. It really is a great opportunity for the 6 partner to say, oh, why are you 2? What's going on? So even though they're probably not going to have sex that night, they're having a moment of emotional connection, which ultimately will lead to more sex. Or let's say one partner is a 7 and one is a 5. The 5 partner can, say like, I'm a 5, but let's see what you can do to get me up to an 8, or, something like that. And then it can become like a playful sexual banter. And then this tends to be, a little bit more of a positive interaction. So, and one last thought about asking for sex, like, please remember that it's really hard to ask for sex. It leaves people really vulnerable. So be kind when turning your partner down. It is perfectly okay to turn your partner down. But the type of rejection they receive will likely influence how willing they are to initiate sex again. There is a huge difference between saying like, ugh, no way, and I love you, but I am so tired tonight. Can we try again tomorrow? Really try to think about what you would want to hear if you were the one being rejected. Secret number 3 is talk about what feels good sexually and how to make it better. So the key to being able to do this is to make sure that you have an open dialogue, and that's going to be the running theme throughout this whole presentation. An open dialogue is really key. So, agree to be honest and kind, and really try to focus more on what you do like versus what you don't like. Obviously, if something really isn't working for you, it's important that you make that speakable, but be aware of the language you choose. There is a huge difference between criticizing your partner with something like, oh my God, stop, like, what are you doing? Versus constructive positive feedback, like, oh, honey, that's just not quite working for me, but I really did like it when you did X, Y, and Z. Most people really shut down when criticized. It's human nature. And that is really the opposite. That really is the opposite of what you want to happen. Try to give compliments about your partner's sexual performance. I mean, we all like to feel like a sex god or goddess every once in a while, right? It's nice to remember that we used to feel that way, at least. And kind of piggybacking off of this idea, it's actually a really great form of foreplay to let your partner know that you're thinking about past sexual experiences. And I should probably add sexual experiences together. Maybe, for example, you stop your partner in the hallway as they're passing and say, hey, I was just thinking about last night. It was really great. Or you send them an email or text saying like, hey, I was just thinking about the night when we went camping at the lake when we were first married. Like, that was wild. Like, we should go back there. This tends to be a huge turn on for people. And it's really fun, and it's really a nice way to remind ourselves that, early on in our relationship, sex had a much more playful aspect, and that is a really nice reminder. Everybody does like that. So secret number 4 is to express non-sexual affection. So when Gottman and his wife interviewed those master couples, they found that the number one thing that made the difference for women in recreating an awesome sex life was non-sexual touching. And I think that this slide is really interesting. I mean, this is really some interesting research here. When I bring this up with some of my couples, like, a lot of guys get defensive. They say, like, I do that, but when I really push them, I often find out that there is, like, the secret hope there that being physically affectionate with their partner will ultimately lead to sex. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that isn't what is ultimately going to lead to more sex. I recently worked with a couple who had a 3-year-old and 6-month-old twins, and the wife had been, like, avoiding, like, any affection with her husband. She'd find a reason to get up from the couch when he sat down. She would shrug out of his hugs, and this really wasn't typical for her. She used to be a pretty affectionate person. And when it came down to it, and she was really emotional about this, is, she, and these are her words, was afraid to accept a foot rub from her husband because she thought that it was a scheme so he could turn around and ask her for a blowjob. And this couple, what they ended up deciding to do was to take sex off the table for a little while and focus on building intimacy and trust back into their relationship. And eventually they were able to resume being both affectionate and sexually intimate. But it really took them focusing on the non-sexual affection for a while in order to make that happen. Now for men, Gottman found that the number one thing that helped establish and maintain a healthy sex life was admiration. And I read one quote from a man who said, I can deal with her not wanting to have sex as long as I know she still wants and admires me. That way it's easier to be patient without taking it personally. And that makes perfect sense to me, and I had never heard anybody articulate it like that. Expressions of admiration tend to really, really decrease and drop off after couples have kids. So try to remember to tell your partner that, like, you still think, he or she is good looking, brave, strong, whatever it is that you do actually admire about them. It will make a really big difference. So secret number 5 is kind of a good one. It's remember that in most cases, she's a Dutch oven and he's a microwave. So I hope I don't have to explain this analogy, but I'm going to anyway, just in case. So basically it means that men tend to be fast and women tend to be slow. So for most people, especially after having kids, sex works way better when men slow way, way, way down. And I know that people are going to say, like, I don't have time for that, and we will get into that in the next slide, but overall, it's important to make sure that women in particular have the time they need to make sex a really great experience. It typically takes women much longer to even mentally get in the game because they get stuck in their running to-do list in their heads. Their brains are half tuned into what's going on in bed and half thinking about, I don't know, like, oh, I wonder if the baby's going to wake up. I really need to get better about sleep training her so she doesn't wake up as much. Like, oh, wait, did I put the baby's blanket in the dryer? Oh, crap, it's going to be a long day if she doesn't have that blanket tomorrow. And, by the time they're actually able to stop these thoughts, they've missed a significant part of the experience. So the best advice, I really have, other than slow way down, is to remember that foreplay actually starts hours before the actual act. Try to think about the things you can do to increase the odds that both you and your partner are going to be in the mood and available. Maybe you offered to do the nighttime routine so she could take a bath, or, you make an extra effort to be nice throughout the whole day, or you make an effort to keep away from the couch and TV, which I know sucks us in pretty frequently. Again, it's, figuring out what works best for you and your partner. One of the things that, I don't have on the slide, but like I will just recommend is that, couples who really struggle with, shutting down their brains in order to be mindful and present during sex, that they practice meditation either together or alone. I mean, some of the research that's coming out about meditation is really, really fascinating. The research shows that even just 5 minutes of meditation a week can have significant improvements on health, focus, I mean, a variety of things, including your sex life. And so if you're going to take 5 minutes to do anything, I would strongly suggest that, you start practicing meditation. And I don't know if anybody's ever used the app Calm.com, but if you don't know where to start for meditation, like they have some really great beginner apps, and you could do them right on your phone. You could do them anywhere, in the car, waiting to pick up your kids, and wherever it might be that works for you. But like really try to give it a shot, because it really does make a positive difference. Okay, so secret number 6 is accept that quickies are important. I told you we were going to get to this. So, really the number one complaint that I hear in marriages about their sex life is that there is just no time, and that fatigue levels are just way too high. And the reality is that in this day and age, there's not always time for a long sex session, but for couples who make sex a priority, they are usually able to get creative and carve out a small chunk of time for, some sort of quick rendezvous. My husband will sometimes remind me, like, hey, if you could find 10 minutes a day to go on Facebook, I'm sure you could find 10 minutes a day to devote to our relationship, which is, kind of annoying, but it's totally true. The challenge with quickies for some couples is, what we just talked about. She's a Dutch oven and he's a microwave. For some women, it just doesn't always allow enough time to have an orgasm. So couples need to really talk about ways that they can make the experience as pleasurable as possible within the time constraints. Some people are okay with not having an orgasm, and they sort of view it as a gift to their partner, which they feel is at least emotionally satisfying. And some people are not okay with this. There's not a right or wrong answer. The key is to, really, again, have an open and honest dialogue with your partner, and try to get creative. I had a couple tell me one time that they kept an airbed in the laundry room because that was like literally the only place that they could go where their kids would never go look for them, because their kids never went in the laundry room. So, figure out where that room is for you, where that space is. I'm sure it's there if you look for it. And I put a little link to, I don't know if anybody had a chance to see the Sex Negotiators video that was out for a while. And I saw it on Scary Mommy, which is an awesome blog site if you ever want to, do any reading about just parenting issues. But it's hysterical. And I'm not going to go into it now for the sake of time. But if you want to go back and look at it, it's really, really funny. And I think you should. So secret number 7 is accept and talk about masturbation. This is a step that most couples try really hard to avoid. It can be really, really hard to talk about. Most therapists, including myself, do recommend masturbation as a healthy way of satisfying sexual needs within the marriage. As women's interest in sex goes way down, men's rates of masturbation tend to increase, which makes perfect sense if you think about it. I strongly encourage couples to share the messages they received about masturbation from their families of origin, their communities, their, religious organizations, whatever it might be, and talk about their feelings about the messages they did receive. People tend to have a lot of complex emotions and possibly some very real baggage about masturbation. It is really, really great for couples to share their feelings about how it's going to fit into their marriage. I worked with a couple where the wife caught the husband masturbating in the middle of the night, and she was just so devastated, and assumed it meant that he wasn't attracted to her anymore, after the birth of their baby. She was saying, I know that I don't look the same, he probably can't get turned on, and she really took it very personally, which I completely understand and validate that it would be, really hard. And when she finally had the guts to bring this up to her husband, he was just completely baffled, just flabbergasted. And his response, I'll never forget it, because I just thought it was so great. And his response was, tell me, what kind of jerk would I be, if I woke you up in the middle of the night to have sex when you were already getting up several times a night to breastfeed and you are completely exhausted. I would never do that to you just because I got a little horny in the middle of the night. And when the wife heard that, like, she realized that his masturbation was in like no way at all a reflection of his feelings towards her or his attraction to her. And, you know, she was really better able to accept that masturbation would be a part of their marriage. I also think it's really essential to remind everyone that like masturbation is not just for men. It's a really healthy release for everyone. And I think it's an especially great way for women to become familiar with their post-baby body and figure out what feels good and, you know, be able to communicate that to your partner. So secret number 8 is to share your sexual fantasies. You know, think about how to bring creativity, sexiness, fun back into the bedroom. And really be mindful of maintaining a safe and judgment-free environment to share these fantasies. I had a couple where the husband, you know, worked up the nerve for a long time to share a fantasy with his wife, and, you know, he put together like this really thoughtful box, and it had like a costume. I cannot remember which one, but it had like a costume and, you know, oils, and it was like a whole fantasy scenario, and he worked up the guts to give it to her. And she laughed, and he was so devastated and so ashamed. You know, he felt just incredible shame that he would have this type of fantasy. And he just felt very strong judgment coming off of his wife. And, you know, her response was not so much that she meant to be shaming, but that, you know, she was surprised and she laughed because it caught her off guard. But at that point, it was too late. It was, you know, some of the damage was already done. And needless to say, like, this husband hasn't been sharing any of his sexual fantasies, and he's really withdrawn in the bedroom quite a bit. And so, you know, they're really working to regain trust and, you know, trying to figure out how to bring some of that safety back into their sex life. Secret number 9 is to, you know, we've been talking about this one throughout the whole presentation, is to discuss your innermost feelings and don't avoid conflict. You know, staying emotionally connected in order to stay sexually connected is the key to all of this. And I just want to point out that, you know, infidelity, which, you know, I think everyone is afraid of, is most often a side effect of marital loneliness. And, you know, sometimes people get really mad at me when I say that. You know, they say, well, you're making an excuse for the cheater. And that's not at all what I'm doing. Everybody is absolutely responsible for the choices they make in their marriage. But when you go back and you look at, you know, who are the previously happy couples, you know, where cheating occurs, you know, oftentimes you do see that it's the couples who, you know, over the years, and oftentimes it's like right after having kids, become emotionally disconnected. So staying emotionally connected and sexually connected is, you know, a pretty surefire way to affair-proof your marriage. So secret number 10 is, you know, when you can, as often as you can, prioritize and make time for gourmet sex. You know, plan date nights, whether that's inside or outside of your home, you know, whatever works for you. You know, utilize the strategies that make it likely that both you and your partner will be physically and emotionally available. You know, whether that's turning off the baby monitors, turning off your phones, you know, sending the kids to grandma's, you know, whatever it might be, you know, really try to strategize about what needs to happen in order for you to take, you know, a good chunk of time and make this the priority. Try to remember that this is a difficult phase. You know, it's a great phase, you know, new parenthood, but it's a difficult phase too, and it will not last forever. But if you don't prioritize your sex life, you know, some of the consequences that come for that, you know, can last a lifetime. So, you know, in conclusion, like, I just want to say that, you know, parents with a healthy sexual relationship, they are calmer, they have more energy, and they are more emotionally present for the entire family. You know, these families tend to do better. So, you know, and this is just a great quote, is, you know, the best gift we can give our baby is our love for one another. So I'm going to look through some of the questions. They're kind of being sent over to me, so just give me a minute while I look through them a little bit. So one of the questions that I just got is, what do you suggest for a partner who is reserved? So I think that, I'm guessing that by reserved, they mean a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more perhaps traditional. I'm not really sure exactly what they mean by the word reserved. But, I think it's important to figure out, how to, both respect the partner and, who they are sexually while trying to find ways that make it safe to draw them out. And, really the best way to do that is through talking and trying things and, talking some more and then trying things and, figuring it out. And if it continues to be an issue and there's sort of a sexual mismatch in terms of, needs or wants, then, by all means, like, go seek out help. There is amazing help out there. There are some great sex therapists here in the Chicagoland area. And, I would strongly encourage that you search those out. Okay, so here's another question. So you're talking about emphasizing the positive, but what about cases where one's libido is completely shot? I try to address that throughout. I mean, I think a lot of people's libido is completely shot. And I do want to say, emphasize again that if it is completely shot to the point of, no interest, no pleasure whatsoever, and that extends over a period of time, like, please, please, please go see your doctor. First and foremost, you want to rule out that physically, nothing is wrong, and oftentimes that can be the case. I mean, your bodies go through a lot after you have a baby, and, it does take some time to stabilize, and, things can happen. So you just want to make sure that everything is working well there. But if your libido is completely shut, I think you really want to explore is that the case, or is that really just a reflection of fatigue, disconnect with your partner. Like, really try to make sure that that's actually what is happening, and see if you could find small, tiny ways to get that back. Whether it's 2 minutes of affection, 5 minutes of, kissing, whatever it might be, start small. Take the pressure of sex off for a little while, because that's huge. That's if you have no libido, that's an exhausting, terrifying thought. So, really break it down into very small, I want to say tasks, but that's not the right word, but, sort of small goals that, like, gradually try to start rebuilding some intimacy, and then see what happens. But, take the pressure of sex off the table at that point and really focus on establishing, intimacy, trust, and affection. So let's see, where are we at here? Okay, this is a great one. So what do you do if your husband is instantly turned on physically at any touch? It's like I'm married to a teenager. So I think, that's a tough one to answer, because, I think first and foremost, I just want to say, like, one, make sure that you're not going to great avoidance lengths, because I think a lot of people then, make sure that no touch actually happens, because, like, you're so afraid of it turning into sex. But two, I mean, really try to talk about with him, how can he perhaps meet his own needs a little bit in order to be able to slow the process way down. So, a lot of times, like, what you'll hear is that, the husband will masturbate before they going into a sexual experience. Like, he really, sort of takes care of that himself, so that way the sex can, last longer and, be a more lengthy, meaningful experience. So, that would be one thing that you could definitely try. And I mean, just remember too, like, just because, your partner gets turned on physically, like, it does not mean that you have to have sex. And I know it probably is awful feeling like you're constantly rejecting your partner, but if you're doing it in a kind and caring way, that's just a reality of where you're at in your marriage at this point. And, see where it goes, utilize some of these strategies and see if it improves. So the next question is, does sex just feel different when you're nursing, or does it always feel different after a baby? And, I can't say that it always feels different after a baby, but it oftentimes does feel different after a baby, partially because, like you're healing and all those types of things, but also just the emotions going into it are different. And so, you will hear frequently, partners talking about the fact that like sex just does feel different. And, the nursing can be a component to that, but that is pretty universal, like that you will hear that oftentimes it both physically and emotionally, can feel different. I like this question a lot. It's much as sleep begets sleep for an infant, does sex beget sex? Totally, absolutely. It's, once couples tend to like get back into a groove, like it makes it easier to stay in a groove. And it's the couples who really, do the things like the number system and, make a really conscious effort to, keep sex in the forefront of their marriage. They obviously tend to have more sex, but it's the couples who, like I said, like weeks slip by and before they know it, they haven't even really sort of raised the issue where you really do see continued rates of drop off. So, if sex begets sex, then, bring it back into the consciousness of your marriage, make it something to focus on, each and every day if you can, within reason, of course. All right, let me see what's next. So let me just say too, like there are a lot of questions coming in, and so if I don't get to answer them in the time frame that we have for this presentation, I would be happy to email anybody with answers. So if I don't get to your question on this next slide, my email is on there. Please feel free to shoot me an email, and I will definitely do my best to answer everybody's questions, but I'll try to get through as many of them as I can right now. All right, so let's see. Okay, so this question is, how long is normal for pain and lower libido? Still nursing but worried. Baby is 8 months. That is pretty normal. So, because your estrogen levels are so low, I mean, a lot of times that can lead to like vaginal dryness, which can, slow down any healing processes. And, the estrogen is like super connected to libido. And so like, when it's at like just such a low level, like it's really hard to, get your libido to go up. That being said, it doesn't mean that you can't, I mean, if there's no pain, obviously, it doesn't mean that you can't ever enjoy sex, but it just means that you're going to have very little interest. And my guess is that like once you wean and you give it a little bit of time, that the interest will start to come up. I mean, and nursing in itself is exhausting. I mean, that's a tiring process. I mean, it's a really rewarding and wonderful process, but it is really tiring, and, it's physically tiring and it's emotionally tiring. This is a good question too. Do therapists recommend erotica or porn to get things moving, or is that opening an unhealthy door? It's not at all opening an unhealthy door, and absolutely, have at it. Use whatever works for you as a couple. I mean, a lot of times that can bring a lot of creativity, a lot of playfulness back into the bedroom, but you have to know who you are as a couple. I mean, like, while that won't work for some couples, while that won't work for all couples, it definitely does work for some couples. And the only time that you want to be, really aware of, using erotica and porn is if anybody has any sort of, internet addictions or pornography addictions in their history. Then, you want to make sure that you're being really mindful and aware of that, and, use it in a way that is appropriate with that person's recovery. So let's see what else. Okay, give me 1 second. So this question just came in, and I actually don't know the answer to this, but it's a good question. So it says, what if the man has no libido? He saw a doctor who said his testosterone was low, which he said was normal after having a boy. Why would that happen? How can they get his libido up? I've never heard that, but I just because I haven't heard it doesn't mean that it's not true. That would definitely be a question that you would want to ask a medical doctor. That would be outside my range of expertise. So, please, call your doctor, ask, because you want to really look into like why this is happening and like how you can get his libido up. So if it's a hormonal thing, you are better off like working with your doctor on that, because if it's a hormonal thing and you're trying all of these tactics within your marriage, it's like banging your head against the wall, because there's nothing you can necessarily do without medical intervention to get your levels back to where they need to be. So you want to make sure, like, if you're using all of these strategies and like nothing is still happening, like make sure you're going in for like a really, really good checkup, whether that's with, your OB or a medical doctor or, whoever it might be, but, seek out the appropriate help. Okay, well, I think that's about the end of the questions, unless anybody has anything else. Please do feel free to email me anything, but this has just been so great. I've been so grateful to talk to you tonight, and I hope that this was helpful and that you're going to be able to take this and really get things going in your relationship again. And I think it's exciting that people are ready and willing to start talking about this. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope everybody has a great night. Thanks so much.